Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Before we get into today's story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're representing. Now, let's begin. The rain fell in sleek silver sheets against the panoramic windows of Julian Vance's penthouse. It was a sterile, beautiful prison of glass and steel perched atop the city's tallest residential tower, a monument to his own success. From here, the world below was a blur of distant headlights and muted sounds, a kingdom he owned but could not feel. Julian stood before the window, a silhouette in a $1,000 suit, the fabric as sharp and unforgiving as his reputation in the boardroom. He was the founder and CEO of Vance Capital, an empire built from nothing but sheer will and an almost inhuman ability to detach emotion from calculation. It had made him a millionaire many times over. It had also left him utterly, profoundly alone. He ran a hand over his clean-shaven jaw, the gesture mechanical. His reflection stared back, a man of 38, with eyes that held the ghosts of old spreadsheets and lost acquisitions. There was a time when those eyes held something else, a warmth that had been extinguished 8 years ago, along with the life of his wife, Isabella. Since her death, his world had been monochrome, a relentless pursuit of more wealth, more power, more distance from the gaping void she had left behind. The penthouse, with its minimalist furniture and echoing marble floors, was a perfect reflection of his soul, impeccably designed and empty of life. A vibration from his phone on the granite countertop broke the silence. It was his COO, probably about the Tokyo merger. He ignored it. The deals no longer brought the thrill they once did. They were just numbers, compulsions, the next rung on a ladder to nowhere. A sudden, inexplicable restlessness seized him. He needed air. He needed something other than this hermetically sealed silence. Shrugging on a tailored black overcoat, he left the penthouse without a word to his silent, ever-present security detail, taking the private elevator down 40 floors to the rain-slicked street. The city air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and exhaust. It was real, at least. He pulled his collar up and began to walk, aimless, letting the relentless drizzle soak into the shoulders of his coat. He turned a corner, leaving the polished facades of the financial district for a neighborhood where the buildings were older, their brick faces streaked with grime and history. It was here, under the flickering awning of a closed pawn shop, that he saw them. They were two small boys, no older than 7, huddled together for warmth. They were identical, with wide, intelligent eyes and skin the color of warm cocoa. One of them held out a small, die-cast toy car. It was a vintage model, its red paint chipped at the fenders, but it had clearly been cherished. His brother stood beside him, a hand on his shoulder, a silent partner in their desperate enterprise. They weren't begging. They were conducting a transaction, their faces etched with a seriousness that was heartbreakingly adult. "Toy car for sale," the one holding the car said, his voice small but clear, directed at a woman rushing by with an umbrella. She didn't even glance down. Julian stopped. He felt an invisible cord pull him taut. It wasn't pity that arrested him, or even curiosity. It was a profound, gut-wrenching shock of recognition. The shape of their faces, the curve of their brows, the way their dark, curly hair framed their foreheads. It was Isabella. It was his Isabella, resurrected in miniature, looking back at him with an impossible innocence. His breath caught in his throat. The world, which had been gray and muted for 8 long years, suddenly snapped into sharp, painful focus. "How much?" Julian heard himself ask, his voice raspy. The boys turned to him in unison. Their gazes were cautious, assessing the tall man in the expensive coat. The one holding the car, who seemed to be the spokesman, held it up higher. "It's a special edition. Very fast," he said with a salesman's earnestness. "We need money for our mom's medicine." The other boy nodded solemnly. "She has a bad cough." The simple, unadorned truth of their words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. These children, who were the face of his greatest love and deepest loss, were selling their treasures on a street corner to care for their mother. Who were they? Where did they come from? The questions swirled in his mind, a chaotic storm of disbelief and a dawning, terrifying hope. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out his wallet. He didn't have any small bills. He extracted a crisp $100 note. "I'll take it," he said, his voice thick. The boy's eyes widened, first at the bill, then back at his face. The spokesman hesitated, looking at the worn toy in his hand, and then at the fortune being offered for it. That's too much," he said, his brow furrowed with an integrity that shamed Julian to his core. "Think of it as an investment," Julian managed to say, "for the medicine, and maybe some food, too." The second boy finally spoke. "Our mom says not to take money from strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Julian said, the words coming out before he could think. What did that even mean? He was a stranger. But looking at them, at Isabella's eyes staring back at him, he felt a connection so primal it defied all logic. He knelt, bringing himself down to their level, ignoring the rain soaking through the knees of his trousers. "My name is Julian. What are your names?" The spokesman, emboldened by the man's gentle tone, replied, "I'm Leo. This is my brother, Noah." Leo and Noah. The names echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart. He took the $100 bill and gently folded it into Leo's small, cold hand. "Please, for your mom." He then reached out and took the small toy car. Its metal body was cool against his skin. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with a significance he couldn't yet comprehend. Just then, a woman's voice called out from down the street, laced with panic, "Leo! Noah! What are you doing?" A young woman came jogging toward them, her face a mixture of fear and exasperation. She was slender, with the same warm-toned skin as the boys, her hair pulled back in a practical but messy bun. She wore a faded jacket and worn jeans. When she saw Julian kneeling before her sons, her expression hardened into one of fierce, protective suspicion. "Get away from my boys," she said, her voice low and firm as she pulled them behind her. Julian stood up slowly, holding the toy car in one hand and his palms up with the other. "I was just buying this," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, non-threatening. She saw the money in Leo's hand, and her eyes narrowed. "We don't need your charity." She tried to take the bill from her son, but Leo's small fist was clenched tight. "But, Mama, for your medicine," Noah whispered, his voice trembling. The woman's face softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her sons, a flicker of pain crossing her features before the mask of defiance returned. She looked back at Julian, her gaze sweeping over his expensive coat, his polished shoes. "Who are you?" she demanded. Before he could answer, she had her boys by the hand and was turning away. "Stay away from us," she called over her shoulder, her voice sharp as she herded her children down the street and into the doorway of a rundown apartment building. Julian stood frozen on the sidewalk, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He watched them disappear, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked down at the small, chipped red car in his hand. It was the only tangible proof that the encounter had been real. Leo and Noah. And their mother, a woman who looked at him with a hostility that felt strangely personal. Who were they? Why did her sons have his wife's eyes? The mystery of it consumed him, a single point of burning light in the long gray twilight of his life. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had to find out. His world had been tilted on its axis, and he could never go back to the sterile silence of his penthouse again. Sleep did not come that night. Julian paced the vast expanse of his living room, the city lights a glittering, meaningless tapestry below. The small red toy car sat on the polished surface of his obsidian desk, an alien object in a world of sleek lines and cold materials. Every time he looked at it, he saw the faces of the two boys, Leo and Noah. He saw Isabella. The resemblance was not a trick of the light or a projection of his own grief. It was precise. It was in the high arch of their cheekbones, the faint dimple that appeared on Leo's left cheek when he spoke, the thoughtful, almost solemn intensity in Noah's gaze. These were details only he would know, details he had traced with his fingertips on Isabella's face 1,000 times in another lifetime. An impossible thought began to form, a seed of madness and desperate hope. He and Isabella had tried for children. They had talked about names. Noah had been his grandfather's name. Leo had been her favorite. The coincidence was too great, the resemblance too exact. It was a mathematical impossibility, and Julian Vance did not believe in impossibilities. He believed in data, in facts, in things that could be proven. By dawn, his restlessness had solidified into a plan. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A discreet, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Davies." "Davies, it's Julian Vance." There was a brief pause. "Mr. Vance, it's been a while. I trust you are well." "I have a job for you," Julian said, cutting through the pleasantries. "It's sensitive. Utmost discretion is required." "That is my specialty," the private investigator replied, his tone unchanging. Julian described the encounter in stark, factual detail: the time, the location, the boys, their approximate age, their names. He described the woman. He did not mention Isabella. He did not betray the wild, irrational theory taking root in his soul. He framed it as a personal interest, a charitable impulse. Davies, a master of reading between the lines, asked no questions. "I will have a preliminary report for you by end of day tomorrow," Davies said. "Where should I send it?" "My private encrypted server. You still have the credentials." "Of course. Consider it done." The line went dead. Julian felt a sliver of control return. He was back in his element, setting a machine in motion, waiting for information, preparing to act on it. But this time, the stakes weren't monetary. They were existential. He spent the next 36 hours in a fugue state. He went to his office, sat in meetings about the Tokyo merger, reviewed quarterly reports. His body went through the motions, his voice delivered the expected commands, but his mind was elsewhere. It was on a rainy street corner, kneeling in front of two small boys. It was with a man named Davies, who was at that moment peeling back the layers of a life he knew nothing about. His COO, a sharp man named Marcus, shot him concerned looks. "Everything all right, Julian?" Marcus asked after a particularly tense negotiation, where Julian had been unusually passive. "You seem distracted." "Just finalizing some personal business," Julian replied, his voice flat, offering no room for further inquiry. The alert came at 5:00 p.m. the next day. A single encrypted file appeared on his laptop. His hands felt slick as he clicked it open. The report was concise, just as he expected from Davies. Subjects: Leo and Noah Roberts, age 7, twins. Guardian: Lena Roberts, age 31, address 412. Elm Street, apartment 3B. Guardian's occupation: freelance graphic designer, sporadic income. Waitress at the corner bistro, part-time. Notes: Lena Roberts is the registered sole guardian of the twins. No father is listed on the birth certificates. The boys were born at St. Jude's Community Hospital. Date of birth, October 14th. October 14th. Julian's blood ran cold. Isabella had died on October 16th. The official cause of death had been a sudden, massive brain aneurysm. He remembered the phone call, the sterile hospital corridor, the incomprehensible finality of it. She had been visiting her sister, Lena, in a smaller city a few hours away. He had been in the middle of closing his first major deal. the one that had launched his empire. He had almost not answered the phone. The final line of the report was the one that made the world drop out from under him. Additional information. Lena Roberts is the younger sister of the late Isabella Vance, née Roberts. Julian shot up from his chair, a strangled noise escaping his throat. He paced the office, his mind a maelstrom. Isabella's sister, Lena. He remembered her now, a younger, more fiery version of Isabella. They had met a few times at family holidays years ago. There had been a quiet disapproval in Lena's eyes even then, a sense that he wasn't good enough for her beloved older sister. Isabella had left for that visit with Lena after an argument. It had been a terrible one, the worst of their marriage. He had been consumed by work, by the pressure of the deal. She had accused him of disappearing, of becoming a stranger made of ambition and ice. She had begged him to come with her, to take a week off, to just be with her. He had refused. He had told her the deal was too important, that she didn't understand the pressure he was under. She had left the next morning while he was asleep, a short note on the pillow, "I need some time to think. I love you." He never saw her again. Could it be possible? Could she have been pregnant then? Could she have hidden it from him, afraid he would see it as another distraction from his all-consuming work? Could she have confided only in her sister? The timeline was a perfect, brutal fit. The boys were 7. She had died almost 8 years ago. 9 months before, they had been together. The math was an arrow to the heart. He grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed Davies again. "I need more," he said, his voice a low growl. "I need irrefutable proof. I need their DNA." "That is a difficult and legally gray request, Mr. Vance." "I don't care," Julian snarled. "Find a way. A water bottle, a piece of gum, a hair from a barber shop. I will pay you whatever it takes, and I need the results yesterday." While he waited for the results of the covert DNA test, a torturous 3-day process, Julian found himself drawn back to their neighborhood. He couldn't stay away. He drove his understated sedan, not the flashy sports car, and parked blocks away, watching from a distance. He saw Lena walk the boys to school, her hand held firmly in theirs. He saw them playing in a small concrete schoolyard during recess, their energy a vibrant splash of color against the drab surroundings. He saw Leo trip and scrape his knee, and he watched Noah immediately rush to his side, helping him up, his small face a mask of concern. Julian felt an ache in his chest, so profound it was a physical pain. These were his sons. He knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic. He was watching their lives through a window, a ghost at a feast. He saw the worn patches on their jackets, the way Lena would counter change carefully at the corner market. He, a man who could buy and sell entire city blocks, had children who were worried about the cost of cough medicine. The shame was a toxic, burning thing. Davies called on the 3rd day. "I have the lab report. I'm sending it now." The file arrived. Julian's hands were steady now, frozen with a terrible calm. He opened it. 2 columns, subject, Julian Vance. Subject, unidentified male child. From discarded water bottle, L. Roberts. And at the bottom, the cold, clinical, life-altering conclusion. Result, 99.999% probability of paternity. The tested parties share the genetic markers indicative of a father-son relationship. The screen blurred. Julian leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his head in his hands. It was true. It was all true. Isabella had given him children. His last angry words to her were not the end of their story. A new chapter had been written in secret, a chapter filled with 2 small boys who had her eyes. He was a father. The word was foreign, terrifying, magnificent. The grief for Isabella crashed over him anew, sharper than ever before, because now it was tangled with the grief for 8 lost years. 8 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, and bedtime stories he had missed, all because of his ambition, all because of a deal. Isabella had been right. He had been a stranger. He had traded his family for an empire of ghosts. But the past was the past. The question now was the future. What did he do? He couldn't just storm into their lives, a billionaire father appearing out of thin air, waving a DNA test like a corporate takeover document. He had seen the look in Lena's eyes. She was a fortress, built to protect those boys from a world she clearly distrusted, a world that he, Julian Vance, personified. He had to get closer. He had to understand their lives, their needs. He had to earn his way in. He picked up the chipped red toy car from his desk. It had been their opening. It would have to be his guide. He needed a new strategy, one that had nothing to do with power or money and everything to do with patience and humility, two qualities he barely possessed. He would start by orchestrating another meeting, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a concerned member of the community. He would approach Lena not as the father of her sons, but as someone who wanted to help. It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie in service of the most profound truth of his life. Julian's first attempt at contact was a carefully calculated failure. He couldn't just appear on Lena's doorstep. The suspicion in her eyes had been a clear warning. Instead, he worked through proxies. He learned from Davies's report that the small park where the boys sometimes played after school was run down, its single-swing set rusted, its sandbox a sad, neglected patch of dirt. Through a shell philanthropic foundation he'd set up years ago for tax purposes and rarely thought about, he made an anonymous donation to the city's Parks Department. The donation was earmarked specifically for the renovation of Elm Street Park. Eyed up, it was an absurdly large sum for such a small project. Within a week, a construction crew descended, replacing the old, dangerous equipment with a vibrant new play structure, complete with slides, a small climbing wall, and soft, wood-chip ground cover. He watched from his car the first day the boys saw it. Their whoops of joy were audible even through the closed window. They ran to the new swings, pumping their legs to see who could go higher, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. Lena watched them, a rare, unguarded smile on her face. Julian felt a pang of something warm and unfamiliar in his chest. It was the first time he had ever used his money to create pure, unadulterated happiness. It felt better than closing any deal. His next step was more direct. He learned from Davies's updated file that Lena's part-time waitressing job was at a small family-owned diner called the Corner Bistro. One afternoon he went in. He wore jeans and a simple dark sweater, leaving his expensive watch and coat behind. The place was cozy, smelling of coffee and fried onions. Lena was behind the counter, her brow furrowed in concentration as she took an order. She didn't notice him slide into a booth in the corner. He ordered a coffee from another waitress and just watched. He saw the easy way she interacted with the regulars, the patience she had with a fussy child at a nearby table, the exhaustion that settled on her features when she thought no one was looking. This was her life, a constant grinding hustle to keep her small family afloat. The guilt was a physical weight in his stomach. When she finally came to his table to refill his coffee, she stopped short, the pot hovering in midair. Recognition dawned, followed immediately by suspicion. "You," she said, her voice flat. "Hello," Julian said, trying for a neutral, friendly tone. "Coffee's good here." "What do you want?" she asked, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't accusing, she was demanding. There was no artifice to her. It was unnerving and, to his surprise, refreshing. "I live in the area," he lied, the falsehood tasting like ash. "I saw you and your boys the other day in the rain. I just wanted to make sure you were all okay." Her expression didn't soften. "We're fine. We don't need anything from you." She filled his cup with a perfunctory splash and turned to walk away. "Wait," Julian said, a little more desperately than he intended. She paused, her back to him. "The park," he said. "The new equipment. It's nice to see the city finally investing in this neighborhood." She turned back, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Yes, it is," she said slowly. "A miracle, I guess." She looked him up and down again, a silent calculation happening behind her eyes. "Goodbye, Mr. Julian," he supplied. She gave a curt nod. "Julian." And then she was gone, back to the clatter and bustle of the lunch rush. It was a start. A terrible one, but a start. He began to frequent the diner, always sitting in the same corner booth, always ordering a simple coffee. He never pushed, never demanded her attention. He just became a quiet, consistent presence. After a week, she stopped looking at him with outright hostility and settled into a kind of weary curiosity. She'd bring his coffee with a clipped, "Here you go," and he'd reply with a simple, "Thank you, Lena." Using her name was a small, deliberate step. The first time he said it, he saw her flinch, almost imperceptibly. The breakthrough he was looking for came not from him, but from one of the boys. He was leaving the diner one afternoon when he saw them coming down the street, clearly on their way to meet their mother after her shift. Noah, the quieter one, was walking with his head down, kicking a loose stone. Leo was a few paces ahead, chattering away. As they passed him, Noah stumbled on an uneven piece of sidewalk and went down hard, his hands scraping against the rough concrete. He cried out, more in surprise than pain. Lena, hearing his cry from the diner's doorway, rushed out. But Julian was closer. He was kneeling by Noah's side in an instant, his heart seizing in panic. "Are you okay, son?" The word son slipped out, natural and terrifying. Noah looked up at him through tear-filled eyes, his lower lip trembling. He recognized the man from the rainy night, the man who had bought their car. He simply stared, clutching his bleeding palms. Lena arrived, scooping Noah into a fierce hug. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She examined his hands, her touch gentle and efficient. "It's just a scrape, sweetie. You're okay." She looked up at Julian, her protective instincts on high alert. "What did you do?" "He just fell," Julian said, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I was just passing by." Leo, who had been watching the exchange, spoke up. He called him son, he said to his mother, his tone one of pure, childish observation. Lena froze. She looked from Leo to Julian, a new, more complex kind of suspicion dawning in her eyes. The pieces were starting to click into place for her, too. The man in the expensive coat who appeared out of nowhere, the anonymous park renovation, his sudden quiet presence at her job, and now this unconscious slip of the tongue. "Who are you?" she asked again, but this time her voice was different. It wasn't hostile. It was dangerously quiet, filled with a dread that mirrored his own. Julian knew this was it. The lies and pretenses were over. "We need to talk," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Please, not here." She looked at her boys, then back at his face, searching for something. Finally, she gave a slow, reluctant nod. "My shift is over. Follow us." He followed them the few blocks back to their apartment building, the same one he had watched from his car. The lobby smelled of dampness and disinfectant. They climbed 3 flights of worn, creaking stairs to apartment 3B. The moment she unlocked the door, the boys ran inside, the familiar comfort of home erasing the memory of the scraped knee. The apartment was small, but it was filled with a warmth his penthouse desperately lacked. Colorful children's drawings were taped to the walls. A stack of books sat precariously on a coffee table. It was tidy but lived in, every object infused with a sense of belonging. Lena led him to a small, functional kitchen table. She settled the boys in the living room with a book before returning to face him, her arms crossed over her chest. "All right," she said, her voice low so the boys wouldn't overhear. "Talk. Why are you following my family? Why do you keep showing up? And why do you look at my sons like you've seen a ghost?" Julian took a deep breath. The truth felt like a stone in his throat. "Because I have," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They have Isabella's eyes." Lena recoiled as if he had struck her. The color drained from her face. "Don't you dare say her name." "Lena, I didn't know," he pleaded, leaning forward. "I swear to you, I didn't know. Not until I saw them, not until I hired someone to find out who they were, not until I saw a DNA test that said Noah and Leo are my sons." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint sound of the boys murmuring to each other in the next room. Lena stared at him, her expression a maelstrom of shock, anger, and a grief so profound it seemed to hollow her out from the inside. The fortress she had built around her life had just been breached, and the man she had blamed for her sister's unhappiness was standing in her kitchen, claiming her children as his own. Lena's face was a marble mask of disbelief. For a long moment she said nothing, simply staring at him as if he were a creature from another planet who had just uttered an incomprehensible language. Then a bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Your sons?" she whispered, the words dripping with years of stored-up venom. "You have no right. You have no right to them, Julian." "They are my children, Lena." "They are my children," she shot back, her voice rising with a ferocity that made him flinch. She lowered it again, glancing nervously toward the living room. "I am the one who was there. I was there when their mother cried herself to sleep because her husband was more married to his work than to her. I was there when she found out she was pregnant, terrified to tell you because she knew you'd see it as another liability on your balance sheet." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and everyone hit its mark. Julian felt his own defenses crumble under the weight of her truth. He started, but no excuse came. What could he say? She was right. "She came to me," Lena continued, her voice trembling with the memory. "She said she just needed a little time, a little space to figure out how to reach you. She thought if she could just get away from the city, from the pressure of your life, she could find the words. She was going to tell you, Julian. She loved you. God help her, she did." He closed his eyes, the old, familiar grief clawing at him. "What happened?" "She died," Lena said, her voice breaking. "She died 2 days after they were born. A blood clot, the doctors said. It was sudden, peaceful. But she left them behind. She left them with me." She sank into a chair at the table, her face in her hands. "Her last words to me, she made me promise. She said, 'Promise me you'll protect them, Lena. Don't let them grow up in that cold, empty world. Don't let him turn them into him.' I promised her, Julian. I promised my sister I would keep them safe from you." The raw agony in her voice was devastating. He finally understood the depth of her hostility. It wasn't just suspicion. It was a sacred duty. He was the villain in her story, the ghost she'd been protecting her family from for 7 years. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, the words feeling hollow even to him. "Aren't you?" she challenged, looking up, her eyes blazing with unshed tears. "You show up with your money, fixing parks and spying on us from diners. You think you can just buy your way back in? You think a DNA test makes you a father? A father is the one who is there. A father is the one who scrapes knees and reads bedtime stories and worries about the flu. You're not a father, Julian. You're a source of genetic material." The cruelty of her words was surgical, precise, and entirely deserved. He had no defense. He could only sit there and take it, absorbing the full impact of his past failures. He had lost Isabella because of his ambition. He had almost lost his sons, too. "I want to be," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. "I want to be their father. Let me try. Please, Lena, don't punish them for my mistakes." That argument, at least, seemed to land. She looked away, toward the sound of her boys' voices. Her love for them was a palpable force in the small room. He could see the war raging within her promise to her sister, versus the undeniable reality that these boys had a father who was, for whatever reason, now here and wanting to be in their lives. And perhaps a small pragmatic part of her recognized the struggles she faced alone. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice weary, defeated. "To get to know them," he said immediately, "and for them to get to know me, slowly, on your terms. No grand gestures, no money, just time." "I'll come to the park. I'll bring a soccer ball. We'll have dinner at the diner. I just want to be present." She was silent for a long time, chewing on her lower lip. "If you ever hurt them," she finally said, her voice as sharp as glass, "if I see even a hint of the man who broke my sister's heart, you will be gone. You will disappear, and you will never find us again. Do you understand?" "I understand," he said, a wave of profound relief washing over him. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a door, cracked open just enough for him to slip through. And so it began, the tentative, fragile process of building a family from the ruins of the past. Julian adhered to Lena's terms with the discipline of a monk. He shed the skin of Julian Vance, CEO, and tried to become just Julian. He showed up at the park after school not in a suit, but in jeans and a hoodie. He learned how to throw a football. He discovered that Leo was bold and competitive, a natural leader, while Noah was thoughtful and artistic, preferring to sit on the bench and draw in a small notepad he carried everywhere. He learned their favorite foods, their favorite cartoons, the silly inside jokes that made them erupt in giggles. He would sit with them on the park bench, and Noah would shyly show him his drawings, detailed sketches of spaceships and dragons. Leo would recount his day, every triumph and minor injustice, with dramatic flair. In these moments, watching their small, expressive faces, Julian felt a joy so pure and fierce it almost frightened him. His sterile world of chrome and glass began to feel like a distant memory, a life lived by another man. He was also getting to know Lena. He saw the bone-deep weariness she carried, but also her incredible strength, her sharp wit, her unwavering devotion to the boys. They developed a cautious truce, communicating mostly about the children. He'd ask about her day at the diner, and she'd offer clipped but honest answers. He started bringing her coffee the way she liked it, without asking. Small gestures. He was learning a new language, one of quiet care instead of loud acquisition. One rainy Saturday, he arrived at their apartment to find the boys listless and bored. "Mama has one of her bad headaches," Leo told him in a conspiratorial whisper at the door. Julian found Lena in her small bedroom, a dim shape under the covers. He could see the tension in her shoulders. "I can take them," he offered quietly from the doorway. "Just for a few hours, let you rest." She peeked out from the blankets, her eyes pained. She hesitated, the instinct to refuse warring with her obvious need for a break. Finally she nodded. "The Children's Museum. They've always wanted to go." "Okay," he said. "We'll go to the museum." It was their first real outing alone, just him and the boys. The museum was a cacophony of joyful noise and color. Julian, accustomed to the hushed reverence of boardrooms, felt utterly out of his depth, and yet completely alive. He watched Leo climb into a mock rocket ship, his face alight with wonder. He stood beside Noah at an interactive exhibit on a light and color, listening to his son explain the science with a clarity that amazed him. At one point, Noah tugged on his sleeve. "Julian," he asked, his voice small, "are you our dad?" The question, so direct and innocent, stopped Julian's heart. Leo, hearing him, ran over, his expression equally serious. "Leo said you might be, because you have sad eyes, like the man in Mama's picture of our other mom." Julian knelt, his throat tight. He looked from one expectant face to the other, Isabella's eyes staring back at him, demanding the truth. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I am." Leo's face broke into a wide, triumphant grin. "I knew it." Noah's reaction was quieter. He simply stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around Julian's neck in a tentative hug. Julian froze for a second before his own arms came up, holding his son tight, burying his face in the boy's soft hair. He felt Leo join the hug, squeezing in beside his brother. And there, in the middle of a noisy museum, surrounded by strangers, Julian Vance finally felt like he was home. The emotional dam he had built around his heart didn't just crack, it shattered. The tentative piece of their new reality was fragile, a delicate ecosystem that Julian guarded with a vigilance he had once reserved for his company's stock price. He was slowly, painstakingly, being woven into the fabric of their lives. He made dinner with them in Lena's small kitchen. He helped with homework at the cluttered kitchen table. He was there to tuck them in one night when Lena was working a double shift. When Noah woke from a nightmare, it was Julian who sat by his bed, his large hand resting on the boy's small back until his breathing evened out. In that quiet, dark room, Julian felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it was primal. This was real. The penthouse, the mergers, the endless pursuit of wealth, that was the nightmare he was finally waking from. But the world he came from had not forgotten him. It was personified by Victoria Sterling. Victoria was his fiancée, or more accurately, she was the woman he was expected to marry. Theirs was less a romance and more a strategic alliance, a merger of two powerful families. She was beautiful, intelligent, and as emotionally detached as he had been. She was perfect for the old Julian. For the new Julian, she was a specter from a past he no longer recognized. He had been avoiding her, canceling dinner dates with flimsy excuses about work, letting her calls go to voicemail. He knew a confrontation was inevitable. It came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in his office, looking not at financial projections, but at a photograph on his phone. Leo and Noah, grinning, with chocolate ice cream smeared on their faces. The door opened without a knock. Victoria swept in, a vision in a sleek, cream-colored dress, her expression as cold and polished as the marble lobby downstairs. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "Marcus is worried you're losing your edge. He says you walked out of the Henderson preliminary meeting to take a call about a school matter." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "We don't have any school matters, Julian. Not yet." Julian put his phone down, his expression unreadable. "Victoria, we need to talk." "Oh, I agree," she said, her tone sharp. She tossed a slim file onto his desk. It slid across the polished surface and stopped just short of the little red toy car. "I had some people look into your personal business. It seems you've developed a sudden interest in philanthropy, specifically in a very small, very insignificant part of town, and in one particular family that lives there." Julian's blood ran cold. He didn't open the file. He didn't need to. "Two little boys," Victoria continued, circling his desk like a predator, "and their mother, a waitress. How quaint, Julian. A midlife crisis? Are you trying to recapture your youth?" "That's enough, Victoria," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Is it?" she sneered. "I saw the pictures my investigator took. The resemblance is uncanny to your late wife." "Tell me, Julian, are you just indulging in a bit of morbid nostalgia, or is there something more? Something that might affect, say, our future, our assets?" The callousness of her words, the way she reduced his sons to a financial variable, ignited a rage in Julian so pure it burned away any last vestige of the man he used to be. He stood up slowly, his full height towering over her. "The boys, Leo and Noah, are my sons," he said, each word deliberate and heavy. "And their guardian, Lena, is their aunt. They are my family." Victoria's perfectly made-up face paled. The sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock which quickly curdled into fury. "Your sons? You have children with that woman?" "They are Isabella's children," he clarified coldly, "and they are my responsibility, my priority." The implications dawned on her. The carefully constructed future she had envisioned, a union of power, wealth, and status, was now threatened by two children from the wrong side of the tracks. Her shock morphed into cold, calculating rage. "I see," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "So you intend to what? Acknowledge them? Bring these street urchins into our world? Do you have any idea what a scandal that would be? What it would do to your stock? To our social standing?" "I don't care about our social standing," Julian said, the realization hitting him with the force of a revelation. "I don't care about the stock. I care about them." Victoria stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time, and she didn't like what she saw. The ambitious, ruthless man she had agreed to marry was gone, replaced by this stranger who spoke of feelings and family. She saw her future slipping away. "You will regret this," she hissed, her eyes glittering with malice. "You can't just erase your life, Julian. You can't erase me. People will find out. And when they do, a story about a billionaire's secret, impoverished children, and their unfit guardian, well, the press will have a field day. And the courts might take a very dim view of a single, struggling woman's ability to care for the heirs to a fortune." It was a direct threat, a declaration of war. She was threatening to use his own wealth and power against the very people he was trying to protect. She was going to try and take his children away, not because she wanted them, but to hurt him and to reclaim her position. The game had changed. This was no longer about earning trust or building bridges. This was about defending his family. The storm Victoria promised arrived sooner and with more fury than Julian could have anticipated. 3 days later, just as he was preparing for the final critical board meeting to approve the Tokyo merger, the culmination of a year's work, his phone buzzed with a frantic call from Lena. "Julian, you need to get here now," she cried, her voice choked with panic. "There are people here, a woman from Child Protective Services, and reporters outside." Julian's world stopped. "I'm on my way." He turned to his COO, Marcus, who was standing by the boardroom door with a stack of files. "The merger," Marcus said, his face tight with stress. "They're waiting for you. This is the biggest deal in the company's history." Julian looked at the boardroom, at the faces of the men who represented his old life, a life of power and cold calculation. Then he thought of Leo and Noah, of their small faces, frightened and confused. There was no choice. There was never really a choice. "Cancel it," Julian said, his voice calm and absolute. Marcus stared at him, dumbfounded. "Cancel? Julian, this is a $5 billion deal. You can't just cancel it." "Watch me," Julian said, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. "Tell Tokyo something came up, a family emergency." He looked Marcus in the eye. "And Marcus, liquidate my personal holdings in Sterling Industries, all of them, as of now." He walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, ignoring the stunned silence and the frantic whispers that erupted behind him. He didn't just walk away from a deal, he walked away from the entire ethos that had defined his existence. When he arrived at Lena's street, it was exactly as she'd described. A news van was parked at the curb, a reporter with a microphone trying to get past the police officer who was now standing guard at the building's entrance. Julian pushed through the small crowd, his face a mask of cold fury. Inside, he found Lena in the living room, her arms wrapped around a terrified Leo and Noah. A stern-looking woman in a drab suit stood opposite them, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Vance," the social worker said, her eyes assessing him. "I'm Ms. Albright. We received an anonymous tip regarding the welfare of these children. Allegations of neglect, financial instability, an unsafe environment." "The allegations are baseless, and they are malicious," Julian said, his voice radiating an authority that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a father's protective rage. He knelt in front of his sons, pulling them into a tight hug. "It's okay," he whispered into their hair. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He stood up and faced Ms. Albright. "These are my sons. This is their Aunt Lena, who has cared for them selflessly and lovingly their entire lives." The tip, I assure you, came from a vindictive ex-fiancé whose proposal I terminated 2 days ago. My lawyers are already on their way. They will answer any questions you have. As if on cue, 2 of the city's most formidable corporate lawyers, men Julian usually dispatched to disembowel his business rivals, entered the small apartment, their expensive suits looking wildly out of place. The sheer firepower he had just summoned into this humble living room was overwhelming. Miss Albright, clearly not expecting this level of opposition, blinked, but Julian wasn't finished. He turned to Lena, who was watching him with wide, stunned eyes. He took her hand. "Lena, I know the timing is terrible, but I need to ask you something. I want us to be a family. All of us. Together. I want to help you raise these incredible boys, not as a visitor, but as a partner, as their father." Teoada, tears welled in Lena's eyes, not of fear or anger, but of overwhelming relief. The man standing before her was not the ghost of the man who had broken her sister's heart. This was someone new, someone who had just sacrificed an empire for her and her boys without a moment's hesitation. She saw the truth of his transformation in his eyes. She squeezed his hand and nodded, unable to speak. The lawyers handled Ms. Albright, who, faced with a mountain of evidence of Julian's newfound and now legally documented paternal involvement and the clear threat of a massive lawsuit for harassment, quickly concluded her visit. The reporters outside were dispersed by a statement from Julian's legal team about protecting the privacy of his minor children. The final confrontation happened that evening. Victoria called his phone, her voice hysterical. "What have you done? My father's stock is in free fall. You've ruined me." Julian stepped out onto the small fire escape of Lena's apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance. They seemed warmer from here. "No, Victoria," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You ruined yourself. You went after my children. There is no forgiveness for that. You represent a world I am done with. Goodbye." He hung up and blocked her number, severing the final tie to his old life. He went back inside. The boys were asleep, curled up together on the sofa, their faces peaceful. Lena was in the kitchen making tea. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a quiet, hopeful stillness in its wake. She handed him a mug. "You really did it," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "You walked away from it all." "I didn't walk away from anything," he said, his gaze drifting to his sleeping sons. "I walked toward everything that matters." He looked back at her, at this strong, incredible woman who had protected his children when he couldn't. "Thank you, Lena, for keeping your promise to her, and for giving me a chance to make a new one." In that moment, under the warm, dim light of her kitchen, a new family was forged, not by blood or by law, but by choice, sacrifice, and a love that had finally found its way home. 1 year later, the sterile white walls of the penthouse were a distant memory. Julian now lived in a house, a real house, with a sprawling backyard, a tire swing hanging from a thick oak branch, and scuff marks on the hardwood floors. It wasn't a monument to wealth, it was a testament to life, noisy and gloriously imperfect. Julian stood at the kitchen window, a simple ceramic mug of coffee in his hand, watching his sons. Leo and Noah, now 8 years old and taller, were engaged in a fierce soccer match on the sun-drenched lawn. Their laughter was the new soundtrack of his life, a melody that had healed every broken part of him. On a bookshelf in his home office, nestled between family photos and stacks of children's books, sat a small, chipped red toy car. It was his most prized possession, a constant reminder of the day his life had truly begun. He had re-engaged with his company, but on his own terms. He worked from home most days, his hours dictated by school pickups and soccer practice, not market openings. Marcus, his COO, had eventually understood. In fact, the company was thriving under a leader who was now guided by something more profound than profit. Lena emerged from the back door carrying a plate of freshly cut orange slices for the boys. She had flourished this past year. With the constant financial pressure lifted, she had been able to focus on her health and her passion. She had enrolled in advanced design courses and was now heading a small but successful creative agency, her talent finally given the space to breathe. The wary, guarded woman he had first met was gone, replaced by the warm, witty person she was always meant to be. Theirs was a relationship built on a unique foundation of shared grief and shared joy, a partnership that was quiet, strong, and deeply respectful. She caught his eye from the yard and smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that still made his heart ache in the best possible way. He smiled back, a feeling of pure, unadulterated contentment settling over him. "Dad, watch this," Leo yelled, kicking the ball with all his might. It sailed through the air and landed squarely in the makeshift goal. He threw his arms up in triumph. Noah ran over, tackling him in a celebratory hug, and they both tumbled to the grass in a heap of giggles. Julian watched them, his sons, his beautiful, resilient boys. He had missed their first 7 years, a loss he would always carry. But he was here for the rest. He was here for the scraped knees, the homework, the heartbreaks, and the triumphs. He was no longer Julian Vance, the emotionally detached magnate. He was just Dad. And it was a title more valuable than any fortune, an empire built not of steel and glass, but of love. He opened the back door and stepped out into the sunshine, finally, truly home.